Hello everybody, my name is Mike. I'm going to be painting a Lamenter from start to finish for you today. This is the first one I've ever completed. I'm going to be painting another one for my army. I've never filmed myself painting before. I've never done anything like that, and I've never even edited a YouTube video. So I'm going to be going about that process. As you can see in front of me, I tried a couple of different yellows before I landed on the one that I actually am going to use today. This one all the way on the right is Everland Sunset. It's a pretty good color. Then I have Demonic Yellow, a little bit too bright for me, I think. And then I combined them through my airbrush for this color, which is okay, but I ended up going with something else. So this is Yandin Yellow. This is the contrast color paint that I used for my first Lamenter and what we're going to be using today. Contrast paints are super cool. They actually collect in the recesses of your models and stain the rest of it. So what that means is you get a lot of contrast, haha, very quickly without having to do a whole lot of work. So that's why I picked this color, and I think it works really well for Lamenters, or it could possibly also work for Imperial Fists. But one thing to note about contrast colors is that you need to prime your models and then base it in something pale, like I've done here. This was a previously built model that I built a long time ago when I first got them, and then I based it in white, and then I covered up that white with Pale Sand by Vallejo. So let's get started painting this guy. So here I have Yanded Yellow on my paintbrush. This is a Raphael #1, so it's pretty small. And you're just going to start wherever you want. And just remember, when you're using contrast paints, you have to pull from where you want the least dark color to where you want the most dark color. So light to dark. So that's what I'm doing here, making sure that the bottom of this panel is going to have more color. Another really important thing to remember when you're using contrast paints is that you can't really go over it when you put the paint onto the model until it's completely dry. So once that starts to dry, don't touch it anymore until it's completely dry. You're going to tear the paint. It's not going to look very good. The other really cool thing that you can do is kind of dab like I'm doing right here to put more color where you want it. And so that's going to add more shadow and more contrast to your model without you having to do multiple steps of glazing like you would have to with a normal color. So as you can see, it's pulling into those recesses and adding that contrast without me really having to focus on it. And it's going to dry really, really nice. So I'm going to do the rest of the leg. Then the same way, pulling from that light to the dark areas and, just kind of being careful, but not too careful. You can be kind of sloppy with contrast paints. They're pretty forgiving, but just remember, you're going to add a lot of darkness wherever you pick that paintbrush up off that model. So that's something that you have to be kind of aware of, which is very different than regular acrylics. Another cool thing about contrast is you don't have to dilute them. You can, they're going to be even more translucent, but you don't have to. My #1 motto for new painters is if you're using regular paints, dilute, dilute, dilute. If you don't thin your paints, you're going to end up clogging up a ton of detail. You're not going to know why your model's coming out gross, and it's just going to be super frustrating. So I recommend using a wet palette, which I can recommend videos down in the description to learn how to make your own. I use one for just about everything except for contrasts and shades. So this is the leg process, and I'm going to speed up the rest of this painting of this base coat using Yandin Yellow just so we can get through this video together. I think all in all, this first base coat probably took me 10, 15, 20 minutes. I do spend a little bit more time than I think you need to, just really focusing on where that Yandin Yellow is going to end up pooling and where those shadows are going to be. Always think about light, always think about shadows, and your paint's going to come out great. So when you're thinking about shadows, you're thinking about what's going to be darkest. And if you notice on the back of this guy's leg, there's those little like rivets. So I spend a little bit of time in just 1 second adding extra contrast paints to those rivets. And it looks like I spent a lot of time making sure that those areas are brighter, but I really didn't. I just kind of tapped it a little bit. And that's what I'm doing on that side panel too. That's why contrast paints are so useful. That's why they're so great. I also mess up a little bit and paint some areas that I need to stay white so I can use a different contrast paint later. But that's fine. I can always go back once it's completely dry and add another layer of pale sand. So don't freak out. This is just a base coat. You can be a little bit messy, like I said before. So that's the leg. Now we're back and we have our fully yellow Lamenter, which is awesome. Like I said, I messed up a couple of spaces like on his holster, but that's fine. We are going to cover it up in just the next step. I do have my colors on my wet palette, which you'll see, and that keeps your paint diluted. That keeps your paint thin. Like I said before, and I'll just reiterate it over and over again, thin your paints. It's easier to use 2 thin coats, 5 thin coats than it is to fix 1 thick coat. So this is my wet palette with some paint on it. I can go through the colors a little bit more as we get into it, but the main one we're going to be using right now is pale sand. My wet palette does have water on it, so my paint's already a little bit diluted, and my paintbrush is wet. So that's the amount of paint that I want. Then I use a paper towel to get most of it off because you don't want the paint to just rush off your brush. Then I take my finger and I just swipe a little bit, and you can kind of see that most of my skin tone is covered up, but it's not obscuring the details of like that texture on my finger, and that's what I'm looking for. So white is always going to need more colors, more coats rather, to cover things. That's just how white is. But I really want this pauldron to be as white as possible. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Just kind of cover that very carefully. And if you pay close attention, you can notice that it's not covering it completely. But that's fine. I'll just do another coat. That's part of the process. And if you don't really love the look of some of where some of your shadows are with the Andean yellow, we can cover that up with our highlights. Averland Sunset and Phalanx Yellow mixed together kind of matches a lot of the color that we're doing for, but I don't even cover that up. I just use my highlights later, which I can go into. But especially for Lamenters, this pauldron is super important to stay pretty stark, clean white. I never use white, 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 white. Um, Even the white that you see below my pale sand isn't actually pure white. It's skeleton bone by Reaper. It's a little bit of a cooler white. And even though I could just go right into this ammo pouch with a brown leather color, I choose not to. I cover it up in white, and I'm going to use Gorgrunta for contrast, um, which is another contrast color, which I think looks really good for leather. But I also sometimes just prefer to cover it with like a medium brown and then come in with my highlights and add some distressing marks later. But for this marine, I just felt like Gorgrunta fur would do just fine. Get a little bit more paint on my paintbrush, which is good. And let's go back, wipe some off, and just cleaning this up. You know, it's all part of the process. So I think I'm going to speed up the rest of this coat of paint, just so we're not sitting here for the entire time. So it's important to note again, I'm not using my brush perpendicular with just like the point. I'm using kind of the side of the point. That's super, super important to remember. It's a lot easier than trying to pick out details with just the super tip of your brush. I'm kind of using that side, um, you know, and I'm cleaning up different areas that I'm going to paint a different color. This is also where I start to uh, kind of lose focus a couple of times in this process, but it's fine. But again, another coat of pale sand on that white pauldron. And if you notice that pale sand, even though it's not pure white, it looks pretty darn white compared to the Yandian yellow, um, which is what we want. If I was to use pure white, it would look kind of wrong, and you can't highlight pure white. So don't use it. It's a trap that you might fall into. I know I did when I first started painting, but it's a lot better to use off whites, either cooler or warmer tones. Um, but yeah, so just third coat on that pauldron. Goes on pretty quick though. And oh, I missed his belt. So I come back with the white and I mess up a couple of times on this back panel throughout my painting process, but that's fine. I'll clean it up. Just part of miniature painting is messing up, I guess. So now we're back with Gore Gruntifer for all of these leather areas. Um, I'm not sure if I love Gore Gruntifer. It's a very fast way to paint leather, but I don't know if the end result is actually my favorite. Um, which I guess you could say that about all contrast paints. Sometimes it pays to take the time to add the shadows and stuff yourself. So I'm adding a little bit more pigment here just to make it a little bit darker on the bottom where they wouldn't be touching it as much, I guess, in my mind. Um, but just taking my time so I don't get any on that Yandin yellow because that wouldn't look very good and it'd be difficult to clean up. But guess what? In just 1 second, I'm gonna do it again. Like I said, start fighting with my camera for focus. This is the first time I've ever filmed while painting, like I said before, so gonna mess up a couple of times. Um, so now I'm doing the holster, same kind of deal, Gorgrunta fur. I think next time I'm just gonna go for that medium brown leather color and then add the distressing colors myself and then darken it up with maybe a shade. Um, don't know. Haven't fully decided where I stand on Gore Grunta fur though. So just speeding this up, like I said before, I'm fighting with camera angles and my fingers getting in the way here. That's fine. It happens. I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to paint models too, but I'm definitely still learning how to film while I do that. So, yep, just going to continue. I was kind of deciding if that's a grenade or a pouch. I went with it's a pouch. That's the beauty of painting models. You can just kind of decide stuff. So, darkening this up. This guy apparently doesn't use his pistol very often. He usually uses his bolt gun. That's what I decided anyway. I like to tell stories with my models, either in my head or while I'm painting them. But right there, ooh, messed up. Added some Gorgrunta fur to his back armor panel. That's fine. I'll fix it later. So now we're going to go into red color. I'm going to paint the crest on his chest. If I could go back in time, I would not have built this guy or any of my models really before going and trying to paint them. So the way I like to do it now that I've learned is I like to do it in sub-assemblies. This is Mephiston Red, so just getting some of that excess off. Mephiston Red is a color by Games Workshop that I just absolutely love. If there was only one color that I had by them, that would be the color. Even if you're a huge fan of other paint lines, definitely recommend Mephiston Red. And I'm not sure if this is actually supposed to be red on Lamenters. I know Lamenters have some red accents, but I'm not sure if their chest is supposed to be red. Uh, but it's my model, so my Lamenters have a red chest emblem. And this is why sub-assemblies is so good, so I wouldn't have to work around this bolt gun. It's really hard to bend your paintbrush the way you would like it to be bent to paint this stuff. But hindsight is 2020. This is one of the first Space Marine models I ever got. It's actually one of the first models I ever got. I got a Imperial starter set with some Primaris Space Marines, which this guy is, and some Death Guard Marines, which I painted a long time ago. And as soon as I bought them, I built them all up all at once, which was a ton of fun. I really like the building process, but I don't really love the fact that now I have to fight myself to paint these guys' crests. But Mephiston Red makes it a little bit easier just because it goes on in one or two coats, even when it's thinned down. Um, and so I'm just kind of deciding where I'm going to hold the model and where I should hold my paintbrush so I don't keep bashing the camera. So let's try again to get in there and paint this crest. It is also important to note that it does not matter if I get some red paint on my bolt gun because I'm going to come back and paint that whole thing with an opaque layer anyway. I'm going to be painting that with either lead belcher or iron hand steel. I can't remember exactly which one, both of which are also good colors by Citadel. Most of my paints are Citadel paint pots that I have transferred into dropper bottles because when I first started painting, that was really the only way to do it. well, it was the only way that I knew. They were the only paint company that I knew about. Going back, I'd probably go with Vallejo. They're a little bit thicker. A lot of their paints are a lot more consistent. But if Citadel makes a good paint, they make a great paint, and that's the case for Mephiston Red, like I said before. So another thing that's going to be red on this guy is not this pauldron, uh, but the other one. The other pauldron's trim is going to be red. So right here, I'm just looking to make sure I'm not missing any spots. Oh, it looks like I did. So let's just paint that skull a little bit better. You can't even see it in the camera. Sorry. But the other great thing about acrylic paints is they dry super fast. So by the time I got back to the other side of that crest, it was already wet. I mean, it was already dry rather, so I could do it. So let's paint this pauldron trim, this red color. And this is another important aspect of just using the side of your brush. Oh no, I'm wrong. I'm not painting the chest again. Sorry. But yep, so let's paint this in that kind of slashing motion right there. Ooh, look at that. Look how much easier that is rather than trying to go and just like, trace that with the very tip of your brush in a perpendicular manner. It just wouldn't work out very well. This is so much easier. So it might look like I'm using the tip, but I'm really not. I'm using that side. Pauldrons are a great place to do this on. And I don't know what squad emblem I'm going to use on that pauldron for him. I have not decided that yet. Oh, fighting the focus again. um, but yeah, so I just know that it's going to be yellow and that the pauldron trim is going to be red. So just working on that. This is a pretty accurate view of how long it takes me to paint. Some of these more details, and you really don't need to do this if you're just trying to paint your first army or your first models. Oh, messed up a little bit there. Some of the bristles bled some red paint onto it, but that's fine. We'll fix it up when we start doing those highlights. So just completing that trim and fighting that focus again. Okay, keep going. And the power pack is actually getting in the way. Again, wish I could go back in time and use sub-assemblies, but I can't. You can't even see while I'm doing it. I was focusing so hard on not getting it onto that. So sorry about this camera angle. It's just something that I'm gonna have to learn to work around and deal with. So now I'm painting that underside of that trim. Again, this is another part that probably isn't super important, but I like to paint almost all of my model. And in this view, you can actually see where I overshot with that Gorgrunta fur, but I'll fix it. That's kind of always my motto with miniature painting. Take your time, be as careful as you can, but don't freak out if you cover over something you don't want to. So I'm sucking up some of that Gorgrunta fur. You can do that with contrast paints because it takes so long to dry, and just getting some of that excess off. But it's mostly dry now, so I have that line. So I'm going to come back later and color in that yellow. But how you suck up extra paint is you clean your brush, get your paper towel, and get most of the wetness off, and then just come and kind of dab around as if you're trying to paint it again, and it'll pick up some of that excess. So I know some people actually with their Lamenters or anything yellow, they use Gorgrunta fur to shade it, but I don't think it's super necessary. I like my Marines to be pretty bright. So let's see. Just kind of using another little bit of. I think this is just water for this. I'm just messing around with that Gorgrunta for picking up any accesses that I might have missed that first time. Now, I'm using Phalanx Yellow, and this is going to be our first highlight. You do not need to highlight as much as I highlight. I kind of do a fake Games Workshop heavy metal style, but I like it. I panel line just about everything. I'm sorry, you can't even see it. And actually, what I'm doing here is I'm not highlighting. I'm just giving myself a good base coat to come back with the end in yellow. So I'm covering up one of my mistakes with that Gorgrunta fur. With some of that Phalanx Yellow, I'm going to come back with the end in yellow and darken it up later. And that's just a way that I don't have to start from square one with a completely clean coat of pale sand. Um, it's a decent technique for me. I'm doing like tabletop ready stuff. I'm not exactly going crazy um, with my details or anything like that, but I'm probably going more than you need to. So putting down some of that pigment, putting down some of that Yending yellow, where it would bother me that it's currently too dark with that Gore-Grunta fur. And now I'm just taking a look at my model. I do this all the time, just taking looks at it, making sure that I'm where I want to be. And I noticed that I did not cover the purity symbol, the purity seal rather, with red. So even though you can't really see them, I'm just gonna finish up that wax seal with the red, and just very carefully put it on there. And it, man, that Mephiston red, it just looks so good. Covers in one coat. So as soon as I start putting it on there, I'm just like, dang, that was good. Now I'm just looking, seeing if anything else needs to be cleaned up. Doesn't really seem like it. So we're going to move on to our highlights. First highlight I'm going to do is this is Red Sun Scarlet. It's just a little bit of a lighter red. And I'm going to put it on the very tip of some of the lighter areas of red that I'm wanting, just where the light would hit the most. And oh, man, you can't even see. I'm sorry. But that's going to be that front of the pauldron, that top of that trim on that pauldron. So just one coat, easy. So the next thing we're going to do is add some Black Templar contrast. This is a really good color for the uh, I'm not really sure what this is. The inner armor, the black armor joints. The reason why I like this is it kind of sucks into those the deeper recesses, and it again looks like I spent a whole ton of time highlighting this rather innocuous area. But in actuality, I'm just using one coat of Black Templar. This is a completely optional step. I just think it adds a little bit in my mind. You could use regular black paint. You could even use a really thin black paint, get almost this exact same effect. But I had some Black Templar contrast left over from a different project, so I'm using it here. Um, Anywhere I see these little armor joints, I'm gonna be painting it with Black Templar, and I sped up the footage here, obviously, just to save a little bit more time because this video is already too long. Um, but yeah, like I said, you can paint this any color you wanted. You don't even have to paint it a separate color from the rest of your marine. In fact, for most of my marines, my first marines, I never did. I didn't even notice that this was a thing that people did. But I like doing it in this Black Templar contrast. I just think it adds a lot. And then I'm gonna also paint his bolt gun completely in this color. One thing that I usually do, and I'm trying something new here, I usually color it with metallic first and then go across with this contrast paint, but I'm doing it backwards here. We're just going to see how it goes. But every model that I do, I kind of experiment a little bit, and this is one of the experiments that I'm doing. Just everything that needs to get colored on my bolt gun, I'm coloring right now. And I should have drilled the barrel, but I didn't drill the barrel. I'll do that in a different video. So now we're actually going to start highlighting. This is Phalanx Yellow. I'm going to put this anywhere that light may hit a little bit more on this model. I'm also going to clean up some of the deeper shadows that are not in the recesses that I don't think should be the darker yellow color. Again, I'm testing my paint consistency, and it's good. And I also like to panel line. Like I said before, I kind of do a fake version of Games Workshop's heavy metal paint style. Man, I'm fighting this focus. I definitely need to find a better way to hold this camera. And I just need a little bit more. I'm going to water it down, probably 50-50 mix, so it's almost transparent. It's almost a glaze. Um, and it'll actually dry a little bit duller, a little bit darker than it's going on wet. And I'm doing these highlights. If I was just painting like 100 of these guys or anything like that, I would never do this for all of them. But I just really like it. And I'm also using it to clean up some of my earlier mistakes. And this is going to be our first of two highlights on our yellow base coat. I'm doing this panel lining again. And in just a minute, I'm going to speed up this footage as well, just because it takes a long time. So just really focusing on these panels, trying not to get any of my highlight into the recesses while still drawing some attention to these armor panels. I probably over highlight and I'm a little bit sloppy, but because it's kind of a glaze, I don't have to worry about it too much. Um, I'm going pretty fast, but that's fine. It's going to dry a little bit darker, like I said. Um, and it's just, you'd be amazed at how impressive your model looks to other people while you might see all of the flaws in it. I'm by no means a professional painter. I do this for fun. This is the my favorite part of the hobby. Um, and these lines are probably too thick. And some of you watching are like, "Oh my gosh, I never noticed how sloppy some of your highlight lines are." But again, this is for me. So I'm just uh, do what I like, just on the top parts and on all of the obvious edges. And because this pauldron is kind of sloppy, I spend some time cleaning it up with my highlight, um, leaving some transitions into the darker shadow, and I give this guy a little bit of a mohawk. Later on, I think I come back and I change that again because I don't really like it, and that's okay. As you experiment, you can do whatever you want. But that's kind of the fun part, You as you learn and as you go, you change your painting styles. I'm sure I'm going to be looking at this in 5 years and being like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did X, Y, or Z." Um, Looking at my first models, that's what I feel all the time. But just focusing on those rims and really spending the time to highlight. Coming back, cleaning up some of this uh, back armor panel, and I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to start it over. I just covered all in that phalanx yellow. I'm going to come with Yendon yellow at a later point in the video and fix it up. Um, but I think this adds a whole lot to the model, and it's not too difficult to do once you get the hang of it. So I'm about to start my second coat of Phalanx Yellow for these highlights. I let my model dry for maybe 5 minutes, and then I come back and just see what spots need to get a little bit more of that yellow. And I decide that I'm going to highlight most of this pauldron a crisper yellow. Um, and got a little bit on the white, so I just take my thumb and wipe it off, and that's fine. Uh, so really focusing on where the light is going to hit now, less on the armor panels, and just cleaning it up a little bit. Now this is not a step that I would do when I first started out. A lot of the steps that I've done so far are not steps that I would do, but I really enjoy this step of these highlights. Uh, Yellow is a very difficult color and it doesn't cover very well, which is why that contrast paint is such a game changer. But now that I've gotten the hang of it, I really like. I enjoy painting Lamenters. Not only are they a cool chapter with cool lore, but they have a cool color scheme, just like the Imperial Fists. Shh! Don't tell anybody that they're the same color scheme, basically. So now I'm adding Dorn Yellow to my paintbrush. This is going to be our final highlight for the yellow. This is like a super, super pale yellow, almost a white. I really like the three color paint scheme, meaning like a base coat, a highlight, and then like a super bright highlight. This final highlight is only going to be on the parts that really need it, like the corners, or the brightest parts. You can do a line. I thin my paint out here pretty strongly. Not strongly. I dilute it very strongly, so there's not a whole lot of pigment. I'm just popping this paint just where I think the light is going to reflect most. The corners of the panels, the very top parts. I give this guy a little bit of a highlight on his little mohawk, on his helmet. Uh, and I don't love it. It's kind of sloppy, and I come back and I change that later. But I noticed that the sun would catch on this corner panel, so I kind of add some white there, and this really adds a lot of contrast to your model that you wouldn't really expect because it's just such a small bit of paint. Um, I'm using the tip of my paintbrush, but I'm also, again, kind of using the side, letting the paintbrush work for me rather than against me, trying to do this in a perpendicular fashion. Um, and because my paint is so diluted, you'll notice that pigment, but it's not going to like overtake the model and make it look white or anything like that. I don't know what happened here. It actually looks like the finish is kind of hydrophobic, which is strange. It pools in weird ways on the back leg. Never had that happen to me before. Um, but regardless, I'm just going to move on and continue to do these just like these tips. Just a very fine highlight, thinner and smaller than the highlight with the phalanx yellow. Um, and yeah, this is one of the favorite. This is another one of my favorite parts of the paint job. It just adds a lot with very little effort. You don't have to do these lines. You could just do a dot, and I think it looks really good. So now I am coming back to the bolter with some iron hand steel and just picking out the parts that I think should be gunmetal. Um, Completely your choice, whatever you want to be, gunmetal or a different color. Sometimes I dry brush this stage. I have not yet tried to do non-metallic metal, which I'll get into later when I actually learn how to do it. Um, but just covering this entire bolter everywhere that I think it should be gunmetal, gunmetal. And obviously, I'm speeding this up and the last clip up a little bit just for time. We're already way too long of a video. I'm still learning how to edit, so please forgive me. I'm doing the final touches on this model. I'm about to do the eyes, and I start with red eyes. And I didn't like it. I realized on my other model too, I used green eyes, but I'm playing this in real time just so you can see how I do eyes. It's pretty difficult. It's pretty precise, and it's definitely something that adds to your model, but it's not something that you need to do. Um, but I thought the red just didn't pop enough, so I decided to go for Caliban green. Um, I wish I had a brighter green. I mixed up a brighter green after I filmed this video and added a little bit of contrast. But yeah, Caliban green is definitely much better than Mephiston red for the eyes on this guy, in my opinion. So I come back and cover up my previous experiment with red eyes with that Caliban green, and I overshoot a little bit. Now, I could have left that and it would look fine, but I actually come back later and fix it with some Phalanx yellow. And then I add some Seraphim sepia to the purity seal just to give it some contrast. This is another shade like Nuln Oil, and so you don't have to be super precise with it. And I do decide that I'm going to use Nuln Oil on the bolt gun. So let's see. So yep, kind of just a little bit messy with that Nuln Oil, which is my favorite part about shades. You can be messy. It'll collect in those recesses, just like a contrast, but it doesn't dye everything that color. I noticed a little hair, so I clean that up. And I can't get it with my fingers, so I use my tweezers. Now I'm just looking to see if anything else needs it. Oh, forgot to paint the pistol, so now I come back with that Iron Hands steel and paint that up. Um, and I'm pretty sure this guy is done. I'm gonna let him dry uh, and just see if I have any more mistakes. I'm cleaning up that eye like I mentioned before. And I actually kind of like the way that the light reflects off that helmet. And so that's him done.